Hello. So yesterday we segregated or separated the code for the toolbox from the code for the visualization, and that worked out really well. The only bad thing was that like when we did it like this, the everything worked great, but and then when we did it like this, where the toolbox came first, it did not work so great. And it wouldn't surprise me if it worked, because if you look at the service, we do run the render over and over again as part of the uh, animations. So it wouldn't surprise me if it would have sort of resolved itself, but it also doesn't surprise me that it didn't work. So, whatever. But I suspect what we need to do is just make sure that the visualization is initialized before the tooltip attempts to make changes to it. A toolbox. So the toolbox, does a couple things. One, it sets up the camera, which I imagine doesn't matter when you do that, but adding the mesh is probably problematic to try to do that after you go ahead and set the dimension and set up the render and attach the DOM. You probably need to have the dimensions set up, the render set up, and or at least one of those things need to be done. So basically, the pattern I've always used is basically to call this initialization and then don't call anything in the toolbox until after it's initialized. And there's this really cool new thing called signals. Oh, I did not hit stop called Signals that is really cool for sort of managing this timing code. Historically, I've always used RxJS, which I think is very powerful and very awesome, but I think Signals is better for the vast majority of um, of uses. So I'm going to go into the service and I'm going to add a signal. And the first one I'll add is going to be a writable signal. And then the second one is going to be a regular signal. And I think that's generally the pattern. So the writable signal is, so I'm going to call it initialized. And it is a signal. And it is of type Boolean. And we will create a signal. It's equal to a signal, and we will initialize it to false. I believe that's how, and actually I think this is supposed to be writable. So that just means it can be updated. Let's see. Oh, and I need a colon here. And then I think I can, yeah. So it knows, just double check that it's from core. Double check that one's from core. Okay, so this is the one that we will update. And then they have this pretty cool thing called, let's see, private is initialized. It is a little awkward. It's a bit redundant, but I think it works pretty well. Um, and that's also a Boolean. And this one can't be updated. And it should not be private. So this is the one that, this is what like children or anything that uses the service will use. And then they have this thing called computed, and then you give computed a function and you return initialize. I'm actually going to make that past was it initialized. And so computed also comes from core. And boom. What did I do wrong? Oh, yeah, you have to execute it. There we go. It's going to take me a little while. I've only been playing around with signals for a couple weeks now, so to get the hang of it. All right, and so now we want to create a function. And we'll say set initialize or initialize mark as initialized. Mark as initialized. And that will return nothing. Nothing. And what it will do is it will take this dot initialized, and it has a set member function, and we'll set it to true. So that's all cool. It's very like pretty simple. And so now we are going to mark it as initialized after this code is all done. So basically dot mark as initialized, and then we're going to come in here, and we're going to say we're going to create a constructor, and then booyah, and then we are going to say effect. And this is so strangely exotic to me. Just, it always makes me feel good when something like this happens, because I know I'm keeping up. So effect takes a function, and I'm going to say if, and I'm going to say this dot 3JS service dot is initialized. I'm going to say if that's true, then run this code. And boom. And that's so cool and so simple, and there's no destroying of anything, and it's very, I don't know. I guess it's a little awkward and hard to, like, in my mind, I always like to try to imagine what's happening in JavaScript, and I don't think this has a real equivalent in JavaScript. So then if that falls through for me, then mentally I like to just imagine what the transpiler is doing. So my guess is the transpiler is looking in, it sees this keyword of effect, and that basically says, hey, go ahead and tokenize everything in here. And when you find a token that matches a token, a signal, then write code that subscribes to the changes to that, and then execute the code inside of it. So it's just basically a pub sub for this code, and that is cool. It's simple for some reason, very easy to remember. I've only been playing with it for a couple weeks. I know it took me like over like a long time to get real comfortable with behavior subjects and all that kind of stuff in RxJS. And this is only taking me like, this is just a lot simpler. I believe people have said that this effect is kind of like taken from this whole kind of concept is taken from a couple other frameworks, one of them being React, and then some other framework that I guess started to really pop off, and then the Angular team hired that person to be a core Angular developer, and they've gotten that working in here. I probably am out of my 10 minutes, but I started my thing late, so that's good. But, I did want to reiterate that I think that this is really cool in that I find that if you're a JavaScript developer and your reality, if your code doesn't change to a point where you from 3 years ago wouldn't be able to make sense of it. So like it's 2024. In 2021, if I had read this code, or if I had read this code or this code, I would not have been able to make heads or tails of it. Like if that person time traveled me from 3 years, 2021 time travel to today, none of this would make any sense to me. And to me, that's a good sign that you're probably on the right path, that you're keeping up. If you start getting comfortable and you don't see things that don't challenge you for 2 or 3 years, you're probably falling way behind. And JavaScript lives by the pirate's code. Those who fall behind are left behind. Um, yeah, like if you were coding in 1997 and you were working with an array, there was no push. So this, when you had an array, you'd have to say something like AAR, and then like this, and ARR dot length equals whatever your new thing was. And then in like 2004, I was working with a developer, and I was writing this code out, and he looked at me like I was some sort of, I'd grown an extra head or something, because he's like, "Why are you doing that? Why don't you just say AAR dot push and then whatever?" And you know, I think that's where people who are like really steeped in RxJS today are going to find themselves. They're going to find themselves sort of looking very, very strange to new developers, in 3 or 4 years, because the signals just work really well. Anyways, I'm out of my time that I got extra time for. So happy coding. Bye.